Okay, my side of the mountain, page 20, the manner in which I find Gribley's farm. The next day I told Bill goodbye, and as I strode warm and fed onto the road, he called to me, "I'll see you tonight. The back door will be open if you want a roof over your head." I said, "Okay," but I knew I wouldn't see Bill again. I knew how to make a fire, and that was my weapon. With fire I could conquer the Catskills. I also knew how to fish and to make fire, and that was all I needed to know, I thought. 3 rides that morning took me to Delhi. Somewhere around here was great-grandfather's beech tree with the name Gribley carved on it. This much I knew from Dad's stories. By 6 o'clock, I still had not found anyone who had even heard of the Gribleys, much less Gribley's Beach. And so I slept on the porch of a schoolhouse and ate chocolate bars for supper. It was cold and hard, but I was so tired I could have slept in a wind tunnel. At dawn, I thought real hard. Where would I find out about Gribley Farm? Some old map, I said. Where would I find an old map? The library, maybe. I'd try it and see. The librarian was very helpful. So, you guys, he had to go back down the mountain to find the library because he has to find a map to figure out where he is. He's trying to find his grandpa's old land, okay? Follow along. The librarian was very helpful. She was sort of young, had brown hair and brown eyes, and loved books as much as I did. The library didn't open until 10:30. I got there at 9, after I had lolled and rolled and sat on the steps for 15 or 20 minutes. The door whisked open, and this tall lady asked me to come on in and browse around until opening time. All I said to her was that I wanted to find the old Gribley farm, and that the Gribleys hadn't lived on it for maybe 100 years, and she was off. I can still hear her heels click when I think of her scattering herself around those shelves, finding me old maps, histories of the Catskills, and files of letters and deeds that must have come from attics around Delhi. Miss Turner, that was her name. Found it. She found Gribley's farm in an old book of Delaware County, and then she worked out the roads to it, and she drew me maps and everything, and finally she said, "What do you want to know for? Some school project?" "Oh, no, Miss Turner. I want to go live there." "But Sam, it is all forest and trees now. The house is probably only a foundation covered with moss." "That's just what I want. I'm going to trap animals and eat nuts and bulbs and berries and make myself a house. You see, I am Sam Gribley, and I thought I would like to live on my great-grandfather's farm." Miss Turner was the only person that believed me. She smiled, sat back in her chair, and said, "Well, I declare." The library was just opening when I gathered the notes we had made and started off. As I pushed open the door, Miss Turner leaned over and said to me, "Sam, we have some very good books on plants and trees and animals in case you get stuck." I knew what she was thinking, and so I told her I would remember that. With Miss Turner's map, I found the first stone wall that marked the farm. The old roads to it were all grown up and mostly gone, but by locating the stream at the bottom of the mountain, I was able to begin at the bridge and go north up 1.5 miles. There, caterpillaring around boulders, roller coasting up ravines and down hills, was the mound of rocks that had once been great-grandfather's boundary fence. And then, do you know, I couldn't believe I was there. I sat on the old gray stones a long time looking through the forest, up that steep mountain, and saying to myself, "It must be Sunday afternoon, and it's raining, and Dad is trying to keep us all quiet by telling us about great-grandfather's farm, and he's telling it so real that I can see it." And then I said, "No, I am here because I was never this hungry before." I wanted to run all the way back to the library and tell Miss Turner that I had found it, partly because she would have liked to have known, and partly because Dad had said to me as I left, "If you find the place, tell someone at Delhi. I may visit you someday." Of course he was kidding, because he thought I'd be home the next day, but after many weeks, maybe he would think I meant what I said, and he might come see me. However, I was too hungry to run back. I took my hook and line and went back down the mountain to the stream. I caught a big old catfish. I climbed back to the stone wall in great spirits. It was getting late, and so I didn't try to explore. I went right to work making a fire. I decided that even if I didn't have enough time to cut boughs for a bed, I was going to have cooked fish and a fire to huddle around during those cold night hours. May is not exactly warm in the Catskills. By firelight that night, I wrote this. Dear Bill, that was the old man. After 3 tries, I finally got a handful of dry grass on the glow in the tinder. Grass is even better than pine needles, and tomorrow I am going to try the outside bark of the river birch. I read somewhere that it has combustible oil in it that the Indians used to start fires. Anyway, I did just what you showed me and had cooked catfish for dinner. It was good. Your friend, Sam. After I wrote that, I remembered. I didn't know his last name, so I stuffed the note in my pocket, made myself a bed of boughs and leaves in the shelter of the stone wall, and fell right to sleep. I must say this now about that first fire. It was magic. Out of dead tinder and grass and sticks came a live, warm light. It cracked and it snapped and it smoked, and it filled the woods with brightness. It lighted the trees and it made them warm and friendly. It stood tall and bright and held back the night. Oh, this was a different night than the first dark, frightful one. Also, I was stuffed on catfish. I had since learned to cook it more, but never have I enjoyed a meal as much as that one, and never have I felt so independent again. Page 25, in which I find many useful plants. The following morning I stood up, stretched, and looked about me. Birds were dripping from the trees, little birds singing and flying and pouring over the limbs. This must be the warbler migration, I said, and I laughed because there were so many birds. I'd never seen so many. My big voice rolled through the woods, and their little voices seemed to rise and answer me. They were eating. 3 or 4 in a maple tree near me were darting along the limbs, pecking and snatching at something delicious on the trees. I wondered if there was anything there for a hungry boy. I pulled a limb down, and all I saw were leaves, twigs, and flowers. I ate a flower. It was not very good. One manual that I had read said to watch what the birds and animals were eating in order to learn what is edible and non-edible in the forest. If the animal life can eat it, it is safe for humans. The book did suggest that a raccoon has tastes more nearly like ours. Certainly, the birds were no example. And then I wondered if they were not eating something I couldn't see. Tiny insects, perhaps? Well, anyway, whatever it was, I decided to fish. I took my line and hook and walked down to the stream. I lay on a log and dangled my line in the bright water. The fish were not biting. That made me hungrier. My stomach pinched. You know, it really does hurt to be terribly hungry. A stream is supposed to be full of food. It is the easiest place to get a lot of food in a hurry. I needed something in a hurry. But what? I looked through the clear water and saw the tracks of mussels in the mud. I ran along the log back to the shore, took off my clothes, and plunged into the icy water. I collected almost a peck of mussels in very little time at all, and began tying them in my sweater to carry them back to camp. But I don't have to carry them anywhere, I said to myself. I have fire in my pocket. I don't need a table. I can sit right here by the stream and eat. And so I did. I wrapped the mussels in leaves and sort of steamed them in coals. They were not quite as good as clams, a little stronger, I would say, but by the time I had eaten 3, I'd forgotten what clams tasted like, and I knew only how delicious freshwater mussels were. I actually got full. I wandered back to great-grandfather's farm and began to explore. Most of the acreage was maple and beech, some pine, dogwoods, ash, and here and there, a glorious hickory. What are those all types of? Trees. Good.
Trees.
I made a sketch of the farm on my road map, and put X's where the hickories were. They were gold trees to me. I would have hickory nuts in the fall. I could also make salt from hickory limbs. I cut off one and chopped it into bits and scraps. I stuck them in my sweater. The land was up and down, and I wondered how great-grandfather ever cut it and plowed it. There was one stream running through it, which I was glad to see, for it meant that I did not have to go all the way down the mountain to the big creek for fish and for water. Around noon, I came upon what I was sure was the old foundation of the house. Miss Turner was right. It was ruins. A few stones in a square, a slight depression for the basement, and trees growing right up through what had once been the living room. I wandered around to see what was left of the Gribley home. After a few looks, I saw an apple tree. I rushed up to it, hoping to find an old apple. No apples beneath it. About 40 feet away, however, I found a dried one in the crotch of a tree stuck there by a squirrel, and forgotten. I ate it. It was pretty bad, but nourishing, I hoped. There was another apple tree and 3 walnuts. I scribbled X's. These were wonderful finds. I poked around the foundations, hoping to uncover some old iron implements that I could use. I found nothing. Too many leaves had fallen and turned to loam. Too many plants had grown up and died down over the old home site. I decided to come back when I had made myself a shovel. So you can't just go get one if you're him. You have to make one. Whistling and looking for food and shelter, I went on up the mountain, following the stone walls, discovering many things about my property. I found a marsh. In it were cattails and arrowleaf, good starchy foods. At high noon, I stepped onto a mountain meadow. An enormous boulder rose up in the center of it. At the top of the meadow was a fringe of white birch. There were maples and oaks to the west, and a hemlock forest to the right that pulled me right across the sweet grasses into it. Never have I seen such trees. They were giants, old giants. They must have begun when the world began. I started walking around them. I couldn't hear myself step. So dense and damp were the needles. Great boulders covered with ferns and moss stood among them. They looked like pebbles beneath those trees. Standing before the biggest and the oldest and the most king-like of them all, I suddenly had an idea.